Hello, and welcome to this presentation that's going to be presented by Dylan, Sam, Taylor, and Chloe. And we're going to be going over Chapter 11, which is specific word instruction.
Here's the QR code to our pre/post assessment. If you want to try and test your skills before we start our presentation, you can, or you can wait till the end.
So let's get started. What is specific word instruction? Well, specific word instruction includes the teaching of specific vocabulary words that are relevant to a given text. These words are taught explicitly so that students can acquire vocabulary knowledge, meaning they're taught in depth, which we'll talk about later. And ultimately, the purpose of these words, or the purpose of using specific word instruction, is so that students can find understanding in a text containing those words so that they can recall them well enough to use them in their own day-to-day lives. And also helps with their reading comprehension. With that being said, we're going to figure out the how and why. So, how do we choose these words? How do we decide what words we're going to teach and what we're not? Well, somebody came up with a 3-tier system. It was developed by Beck and McKeown in 1985. And this system is for selecting words in a text that are best suited for instruction and direct explanation. So it's categorized into 3 tiers. So the first tier is going to be the tier that is your basic words, so like baby, doll, any of those words that kids probably interact with day to day and they probably already know and they don't require as much instruction. We also have tier 2 words. Tier 2 words are going to be the ones that are necessary for instruction. They're a little bit bigger. They need a little bit more explanation, but they're also not, they're still going to be easily familiar as long as they're taught explicitly. Because a lot of times our tier 2 words are going to be something like balcony. Well, you can explain that with these littler tier 1 words to get them to where they are understanding these tier 2 words. And we also see these more frequently in our text and in what the children learn to read. So it's important to teach those words, and that's really the main focus of your vocabulary. Tier 3 words are your low frequency words. So these words are actually going to be the ones that we don't see very often. They're going to be more specific to the content areas. And so like history or science or any of those. So we really only teach those as the need arises or when they are displayed in the text or in the content area in which they are being taught. So like an example of this word would be like microscope. They wouldn't really need to know what that is until it was necessary. So with that being said, we can ask the question for tier 1. We can ask these questions to know if it is. Is this word a word that falls on the Dale Child list? Is this a basic word whose meaning that the students will likely already know? And if so, it doesn't require as much assistance. However, we do need to take into consideration our English language learners that they might need extra assistance in these basic words because they have a limited vocabulary. So always offer that assistance to those students. For our tier 2 words, we ask the questions, is it a word that the students are unlikely to know? Is it useful in the world? Can it be explained in everyday knowledge using words and concepts that are familiar to students? And is it necessary for the text that they are reading? If so, then obviously you're going to explicitly teach those, and we'll talk about some methods in doing that later. In tier 3, we're going to ask, will the students know the meaning? Is it a specialized word limited to like a field or a content area? And is it frequent in written language? And if not, then you're not going to probably explicitly teach these as much unless you come across them in the text or if the need arises whenever you're going into that content area. That being said, we're going to be talking about the teaching sequence acquisition. So this is the idea that just as we talked about how phonics and the teaching of reading in general is systematic, so is vocabulary in a way. It's going to be it's going to be sequenced. And so we talk about the vocabulary size rather than the grade level because these students, they build upon their prior knowledge, just like they do when they are learning how to read and decode these words. They are building their vocabulary based off of this prior knowledge in these tier 1 words that they already know. And like they're able to then move on to bigger words. And it's very systematic. So with that being said, again, you can refer to the Dale Child list for first and second grade, but also for kindergarten and English language learners, you're going to want to pick words that they likely already know so that they can then later build on to that build on from that prior knowledge to some bigger words that are going to be more likely to be seen in their text. So when you're teaching English language learners, this is an idea created by Margarita Calderon and her colleagues in 2005. When you're guiding the instruction and considering what you're going to teach the English language learners, you want to think about the concreteness of the words that you are choosing. Is it something that is going to be able to be like explained physically, or you can show them? Is it going to be is it a cognate? Is it something that can be referred to in the English language and in the Spanish language? Is it similar? The depth of meaning and also the utility. We're also going to talk about some different reading methods. So students need explicit and direct explanations when learning new words. These students need firsthand practice also after having the processes modeled for these vocabulary words that are being learned. Practice, practice, practice is so important, because if you don't give the students a turn with these words, then they're not going to be able to like have that full come around to where they can like introduce that to their own vocabulary and use it in their own lives. And so we talk about this with a read aloud. So read aloud is obviously like what we do. And so the teachers explicitly teach vocabulary instruction that complements and enhances the storybook reading activities that they're doing. And so a story can provide very rich context, and teachers can model through a text talk. A text talk is something that enhances reading comprehension through open questions within a reading and enhances vocabulary development because of that. That's honestly like kind of like a book study. You want to go through words, you want to open up the floor for discussions for these words, give students opportunities to talk, but also directly model during these instances. During the text talk, we also see that the vocabulary is discussed after the reading the story, but briefly introduced at the point of contact. And so you want to ensure that you are not just like going over the words at the beginning, but you really want to focus on it at the end of the story so that you can then open up the floor and be like, okay, well, we read this sentence in this story. So now let's go back and let's look and see what this was entailing. Like, what was this word saying? And y'all can really like dive deep and talk about it in these discussions. The next thing we're going to talk about, the next reading method, is our independent readings. So these are target words. These target words are going to be introduced at the beginning of the story. So the text talk is going to be introduced at the end of the story. I kind of messed up a little bit on that, but the independent reading is going to be introduced at the beginning of the story, because if a student is reading independently and they come across a word that you haven't went over with them, then they're just going to breeze over it and they might miss the entire context of that entire passage, because vocabulary is also kind of a gateway to reading comprehension, and you have to know your words to be able to read the story. So you want to go over those words with your students before you let them independently read. This prepares them so that then when they see the words in the right, when they come across these words, they're going to see them in the right context. And when a word is likely to affect comprehension, it is most effective to introduce the word when it is met in the text. So you're going to go over these words at the beginning of the story, but you're also going to have these students meet them in the text when they read it by themselves, because you already went over them. So you're going to simply and briefly explain these words, and it is super, super effective whenever they are reading. So when we're introducing specific words, we want to provide word meaning information, because it's the first step of building word knowledge. So you do this, you can use graphic organizers, you can use maps, you can use webs, and because you want to deepen their knowledge and understanding. You want to encourage word use in their daily life experiences. That's the whole point of vocabulary, so you definitely want to instill that. So steps to introducing these words, the first one is make the word meaning explicit through student-friendly explanation. A lot of people, they hand you a dictionary. I remember being handed a dictionary when I was in school, and that was not effective because those words were way too big for me to understand. But when you get it on student-friendly like terms, then they're going to understand it a lot better, and they're going to be able to relate it to their own experiences, which is ultimately going to make that come around connection for them so that they can use it in their day-to-day lives. And the second thing is that the teacher is going to incorporate teacher-created context as opposed to text-based context. So giving some different context with these words. that are going to make these words more familiar, and then ultimately getting these students actively involved in word discussions. That's when you can bring in these word webs. That's when you bring those graphic organizers, but also talk about it with your students. Let them come up with their own ways. Have to do like turn and talks and all that stuff so that they can deepen that knowledge and apply it, because that is so, so important. And then we also see the assessment and intervention. So, the National Reading Panel in 2000 suggested that a sound evaluation of a student's vocabulary must be based on the data from more than a single assessment. So, these assessments that are tied to instruction are the most effective. You want to tie it to what you're already learning. You don't want to just pick words from random things, but you will have some standardized tests that provide a global measure of vocabulary skills and are used as a baseline. Standardized vocabulary tests are useful for paying better attention in lower primary grade levels. And the teacher can also, this is just another effective way, just simply ask what students to define a word and assess their understanding. Have them raise their hand and see, hey, do you know what this word means? And if they say the right definition, then you know that they've got it. You obviously want them to give some explanation probably too, and give some of their own examples to use that with, but that will tell if they understand the meaning of the word. So intervention is needed at lower grade levels for students with restricted vocabulary, so your ELLs or even just students that might not have been exposed to a lot of vocabulary at home. A lot of times our low poverty schools don't have students exposed to as many books or anything like that, or their parents might not expose them to as many words. And so it's important to make sure that we are intervening with those students so that they can get the assistance that they need to help them to be successful, because that can prevent failure in reading if you are explicitly teaching them these new vocabulary words and preparing their mind for the knowledge that they're going to learn later.
Chapter 11 mentions various ways to teach specific word instruction. The 3 examples given in the book were the read aloud method, the direct explanation method, and the method for independently read text. First, let's talk about the read aloud method. So in this section of the book, we are told what to do while reading the story and what to do after reading the story. So in the read aloud method, while you're reading the story, you're first going to pause and give a brief explanation for each target word. So as you're reading, you might pause at the vocabulary word and be like, I don't know what this word means. Let's talk about it. The book gave the example of the word mischief. And as they were reading, they paused and said, mischief is a word that means playing tricks on people. The words will be fully explained after the story is finished. Next, you're going to explain other words that might affect comprehension. These are called your comprehension words. They're not necessarily the vocabulary that you've pulled aside and introduced in the story, but they're words that might affect the student's understanding of the story. Therefore, it's beneficial to explain them. After reading the story, you want to contextualize the word. So you want to provide a familiar situation to introduce the word within. The situation might be what happened in the book. When did this word pop up in the book? What were they doing during it? So the example in the book referred back to the story and said, the story tells that the Nazi the spider was always up to some mischief. This reminds students of the word and brings them back to that situation that the word was used in. Next, you're going to say the word. So you might say, let's say the word together, mischief. And then you'd ask, what's the word? And they would respond with mischief. This creates a phonological representation of the word. It gets them saying it, hearing it over and over. Next, you're going to give a student-friendly explanation. So here you can explain the word's meaning using everyday language that is clear and accessible to students. The example in the book, again using mischief, said, mischief is a behavior that is a little bit naughty. It's not necessarily bad behavior. This definition allows students to better understand the vocabulary word. After giving a student-friendly definition, you're going to provide a different context for the word. So show how the word can be used in a different context other than the story. So at the beginning, we related back to the story. Now we're going to use the word to relate to our student. So an idea that I thought of for the word mischief was maybe relating to the school's principal and being like, class, if we played a prank on Mr. So-and-so, that would be mischief. This allows students to understand that mischief means to play tricks on people, to have that sort of naughty behavior. After this, you're going to engage actively with the word. Here you'll provide fun opportunities for students to engage with the word, and I provided the examples that were mentioned in the chapter on the next slide. Finally, you're going to say the word again. You're going to restate the word's meaning as well as its phonological representation. So again, you'd have the students say mischief and you'd talk about its definition once more. So here's how to engage actively with target words. The book mentioned an activity called Finish the Idea. This is when you start a sentence using the word and have students finish the sentence. For example, using the target word again, mischief, you might give students the sentence starter. My new puppy got into a lot of mischief when blank. Here, the students can fill in the blank and it will help you assess if students understand the word in context and its definition. Another way to actively engage with the target words was a game called Choices. Here you give students situations that apply and do not apply to the meaning of the target word and have students choose the correct applications. So, for example, give the situation making bunny ears when someone is taking a picture. Students will reply with the target word mischief if it applies, and it does to this situation. An example that doesn't apply to the vocabulary term in the book was practicing the piano, and students would not respond with mischief. Now let's talk about the direct explanation method. This method is very beneficial for students who are not yet reading and or decoding independently, have restricted vocabularies, or just simply need a boost. During this method, the teacher reads aloud the same stories 4 separate times over a period of 3 days. So throughout this 3-day period, the teacher can introduce up to 25 teachable words per selection. So each time you read the story, you're going to introduce new vocabulary words. On the 4th day, all of these vocabulary words are reviewed together. This method also helps students hear the story over and over, which aids in their comprehension. So the chapter explains us how to use the direct explanation method. First, you're going to select your words. So these are your teachable words, your teachable title words, and comprehension words. Your teachable words are those vocabulary words that you're going to pull from the book that are on grade level. Your teachable title words are those vocabulary words that can be found in the title of the book. For example, the chapter uses the story Common Sense and an Aussie Tale. The teachable title word in that title was common sense because some students don't know what common sense means. Explaining this word in the title will help them understand the story as a whole. And then comprehension words, like I said, are those words that aren't really pulled out from vocabulary instruction, but they might need to be explained to help aid in students' comprehension. So next you're going to introduce all of these words before you read. So in the book, they were introducing 2 words before reading the story, which was calabash and prank. So before the teacher read the story, they said knowing the meaning of calabash and prank will help you understand the story better. This gives students an idea of what they're looking for in the story and why they're learning these words. Then the teacher explains the meaning of these words. So for calabash, the teacher said, a calabash is like a big pumpkin. Again, this is in those student-friendly terms. Then you're going to read the story aloud, and during your reading, you're not going to pause and stop on these words. Have students keep those words in mind, but you don't want to stop and explain them again. After the story is read, you're going to check comprehension by asking various questions about the story, such as the characters, their actions in the story, where they were at, and you also might mention those vocabulary words. And finally, you're going to review the teachable title word and the teachable words. So in the book, they reviewed the teachable title word and they said, do you remember the word common sense? We said that common sense means to have a natural ability to make good decisions. Like I said, this method is to be used over a period of 4 days. This first 3, you're going to read the book 4 times, and that last day, you're going to review all the words together. So the chapter explains that on the first day, the teacher read the book twice to the class. The first time she read the book, she explained the teachable title words, and the second time she read the book, she explained those comprehension words. On day 2, the teacher introduced 8 new teachable words. So this will be her 3rd time reading the book. And then on day 3, the teacher read the book again and introduced 8 more teachable and comprehension words. As the teacher was introducing these words, they also used a word list that they hung on the wall, and each day as they learned new vocabulary words, they put them on the wall so that they could refer back to them and talk about their meaning several times throughout the day. This is a great thing to include in your classroom when you're talking about new vocabulary. So finally on day 4, the teacher cumulatively reviews all of the vocabulary terms and they refer back to that word list and talk about all the words that they've mentioned throughout the story. They'll talk about their definition and how they were used in the story. So on day 4, the teacher doesn't reread the story again, but they do include new sentences with those words. So for example, for the word common sense, the teacher said, it's common sense to bring a towel to the beach. And then you could also add on to this and ask, why is that common sense? Would you bring a towel to the beach? The teacher also asked students to raise their hand if they knew the meaning of common sense, then asked to volunteer to give the meaning of that term. This procedure would just repeat for all of the terms that you decided to use for your story. Now Sam is going to talk to us about the final method mentioned in the book, Method for Independently Read Text.
All right, let me get my first slide pulled up. So I'll be covering 3 different topics, and we'll be working our way up to semantic maps, which will be covered in the next section. My first section will be strategies for independent reading. Function words will be my second one, and then a concept picture short. So this first part, I'll be covering pages 453 through 461. And in the text, it provides methods for independent reading in younger kids. Okay, so from this target word, we're going to use the word coordinate. So the way this will first start out is children will read and pronounce the word on the board. So they'll say, let's sound the word together, coordinate. Ask, what is the word? Coordinate. So they'll say it back to me, and then you'll give a student-friendly explanation. So this can be done just using, the most important part is giving language that they know. And so whether that be, say, when you coordinate a plan, you match it up with someone else's to provide, I guess, an example that they would know, that they would understand. And then the last one would be provide a different context. And so this is through presenting the sentence using the word, then providing questioning to expand it. So that could be like, Mom had to coordinate her work schedule to match Jake's school schedule so that she could get Tom off to travel to Alaska with him. Then ask, what did Mom want to do? What did she have to do to get Tom off? So what do you think coordinate means? That one's a little bit harder. That might be a little older grades, but still. And so you'll engage actively with the word. So you provide fun and interactive ways to help the children better express the information. Whether that be through, it can be a fun activity, it could be a quiz, it could be anything really. Just whatever you think your kids will like. And the first way you can do this would be to ask questions. And you ask questions that are centered toward the meaning of the word. So an example of this would be, how might you coordinate plans to visit a friend? And so you'd let them work together as in pairs or as by themselves to figure out the word and try to get an idea of like what the word means by this sentence. The next one would be finish the idea. And so you'll start a sentence and require the students to use what they know about the word to finish the full sentence. An example of this would be to say, my sister and I tried to coordinate our after school schedules because it's kind of open-ended. And then on the last one is, have you ever? And it says to provide them with the opportunity to use the word to describe a personal experience. And so that could be through, can you describe a time when you should have but did not coordinate plans with someone? What happened? So ask something that'll get them thinking, that'll do, trying to help them understand, kind of compare it to what they've experienced in their life so they can bring it back to that, and that's how they remember it. The text that talks about using the word vista or vista, I can't remember what it is, but and then coordinate, and then interior, route or route, and then at the very end of this section, they use all those words that I mentioned, and the teacher actually creates a passage that's connected straight to those words with all those words. So really, just using all the words with the same similar story can help with understanding them too. And then the next thing is on page 462 or 466. So the introduction of this, what it means is it alerts the reader or speaker to the structure of the sentence, and this word does. And that can be through using in, on, or over. You could also use he, she, we, a, and the, and, but, or, been, should, will. It just depends on what context you're talking about. And so ways to teach this is begin by telling them we're going to learn a word that we use often when speaking, reading, and writing. We will then work through some examples together before practicing individually. And so the way this can be done is, I'll have to show you in a minute, but I'll go move on to describing the guided practice. The students will work through similar examples that was in the model lesson to practice what we talked about. So I'm going to move on to this slide where it shows the two examples. So right here is actually the intro, kind of help them understand it and kind of where I will model that. And so you'd say, hold up a book and ask, what is this? A book. Point to the desk. Ask, what is this? A desk. Put the book on the desk, emphasizing the word on, and say, the book is on the desk. Put the book on the floor under the desk, and say, is the book on the desk? No. Hold the book under the desk. Say, is the book on the desk? No. Put the book on the desk. Say, is the book on the desk? Yes, the book is on the desk. Hold the book under the desk. Say, is the book on the desk? No. And I'll go into the last one. Put the book on the desk and say, is the book on the desk? Yes, the book is on the desk. And so it's kind of a mind-boggling, it's not very confusing, but it's just very repetitive, and it kind of gets your brain working. And so they might miss some, just even though it's easy, they still might miss some just because it's very repetitive. And it's a very similar concept on this one, except they talk about a pencil and a chair. I'll let y'all look at that for a minute. So you'd say, put the pencil on the floor under the chair. Ask, is the pencil on the chair? Yes. You go back and forth and say, put the pencil on the floor under the chair. Ask, is the pencil on the chair? No. And so you do that. They would work through those to help understand and how to use that word, make sure they're using the right tense of the word. Alrighty. Next and last part that I'll be covering is the concept picture sort. Concept picture sort. The way this works is it provides primary students, mainly younger students, with an opportunity to classify and categorize different items or things. And so the way to practice it as a class will be to choose the animals, characters, or things from the story read. So this can be through reading really any book, just to have enough characters and animals to be able to compare them, and not non-living things too. And create a T-chart to split up the ideas in 2 different categories and allow the children to sort them and find the best place for them. Now, after going over these, the students will actually make something like this. And so you would you let them work through it, and then once they work through it, you would be like, okay, so why do you think the frog goes in this category? What qualities of the frog make it a living thing? And just kind of ask questions to try to challenge them to understand why they put it there. And do the same thing with the button, the chair, or the desk, the needle and thread, so for any of it. And then independently, the students will cut different living and non-living things from magazines that will be provided. They'll sort up to 20 in each category. And so what they'll do with this is they will get a magazine, maybe 1 or 2 each, and they'll cut out different living and non-living things. And the reason why this is important, because it's coming back to really just comparing it back to the daily life of them, and like kind of compare it to the real world situations, and making them use those situations to help understand the word. And then the last part of it is, after sorting them into the living and non-living things, ask the students to break down the living things category into plants, animals, and humans. And so for this one, it's more of an extended part of the lesson. And so you would from that category, the living category, you would break it into the living plants, or the living animals, or humans. But also you could do that. I didn't include this in there, but with the non-living things, you could actually do the exact same thing. You could do something with saying what type of non-living thing it is. But yeah, here's that picture again. I've actually done this as a lesson for one of my clinicals, and it was really fun. The kids loved it. I did it with kindergarten, so that kind of maybe shows that it's best for that age, but it's still fun and very interactive thing to do.
Pages 471 through 486 of Chapter 11 cover 5 different lesson models relating to specific word instruction. So semantic maps are a form of instruction that involves taking words and categorizing them and connecting them with one another in different categories. So when you use this in the classroom, you'd want to start introducing the concept. You'd print the given concept word on the board. You'd provide students with the origin of the word and remind students what the meaning of the word is if they're already familiar with it, or provide them with a student-friendly, quick definition of it. And this relates to a text you have yet to read in the classroom. So for example, you could use geography if you're reading about different types of terrain in Alaska. You then want to brainstorm with your students. You ask students to brainstorm a list of words related to the concept. You'd write their suggestions on the board, and if needed, also write down simple definitions relating to those words. So students may call out words relating to geography like peninsula, river, ocean, volcano, mountains, valleys. You then want to actually make your semantic map. Explain to students how semantic maps help form relationships between words. How are these groups of words similar to each other, or how are they different? How do we categorize them apart or with one another? As a class, you'd group the words into categories relating to the initial concept. So as a class, we all may look at those words provided and say, okay, we can group them based on water or landforms. Which do they fall under, water or landforms? So you would put like river, ocean, peninsula under water, valley, mountain, volcano under landforms. You then want to discuss the selections and revise the map after you read the actual text you've selected to read. So after reading selection, the concept relates to ask the students if there's any new terms they'd want to add to their semantic maps. Any new terms also need to be defined, or maybe there's terms that they want to move that upon reading that text decide, okay, that's not what that word actually means. Now that I have context, I need to move it. Active engagement is a really crucial part of semantic maps. Students should have opportunities to interact with the words on their maps. That's the whole point of understanding them and how they relate to each other. This can be done by having students answer questions related to the concept word and the reading selection. Students also can use semantic maps to make their own comparisons between words on their maps. So you could have them compare and contrast the words in each category. Why are they similar? Why are they different? What links them together? But what takes them apart at the end of the day? You can also ask them questions just regarding the vocabulary in general. What's the difference between a river and an ocean? What makes a valley and a mountain different, or a volcano and a mountain different? Semantic feature analysis is closely related to semantic maps, but instead of mapping things, it charts them out in a grid. So when you'd use this in the classroom, you'd want to first select a category. Select a category to be analyzed, have students begin to construct the vocabulary grid to help learn the relationships between the vocabulary words. So they may be reading about boats, and they choose to list out different types of boats they know. You'd then want to add the category types. Students will be encouraged to discuss the vocabulary words with one another and what they know, and as a whole group. In the first column of the vocabulary grid, you'd have the students then print out the words you agreed upon, which may be types of boats or just water vehicles. You'd then want to add features. Students will decide what features or characteristics are important to the category. So for boats or watercraft, it may be motors, oars, sails, propellers, fins, that kind of thing. This will then line the top of the page. Then you want to show feature possession. Discuss the features and how it relates to every word on the grid. For example, in the boat example, smaller boats may have oars while larger boats do not have oars. So they would get marked for having oars. Smaller boats would have a mark for not having them. They have a different mark. But both boats may have sails, so they'd both receive that mark and they'd be categorized as similar because they both have sails. Feature possession helps form relationships between related vocabulary words, but also shows how they are separate from one another. Semantic feature analysis further goes on to you need to expand your grid. Students will help expand the grid further after reading the related text. They will add more features. They will also add more vocabulary words taken from the text. So maybe they learn about different types of boats like pontoons and they want to add that. They will then mark the feature possessions of the new vocabulary words or go through and mark if the previous words have this new feature possession or not, if feature possessions are added. You'd want to discuss and explore the grid after this. The feature grid and semantic feature analysis works best when students discuss and make their own observations. Students should be encouraged to make their own observations and connections between each things. So again, how is a pontoon and a wave runner similar? How are they different? What makes them related to one another? The grid can be continued as whole group or independently after this point. Students can keep using it with the same text, or they can use it with different texts they read independently. Possible sentences is another form of lesson models provided in the chapter. Possible sentences is a method of pre-reading which requires students to understand the words, vocabulary words, to use them in a sentence. So to use this, you'd want to start and select to introduce the target words. Select words from the given text that they are likely to be unknown to students and are essential to the text's main ideas. These words should be easily defined using the context of the text. They should be able to read the text and be able to say, okay, I can understand what this means based upon what the story is telling me or what the article is telling me. Have the words be displayed for the students with these simple definitions and inform students that these words are appearing in the text they are about to read as a class. You then want to write possible sentences. This is before you read the actual text. Students will select in pairs or individually a few words from the board. They will then be instructed to make up sentences containing at least two of those words. They can then share their sentences. Correct uses of the words and incorrect uses of the words should be included on the board. And there should be no giveaway or discussion if those sentences are correct or incorrect in the way they use those words. Upon reading the story, you then want to go back to your possible sentences and evaluate the accuracy of the possible sentences. So after reading the selection, as a whole group, go back and evaluate those sentences. If the sentence is correct, mark it as such, and if it's not correct, discuss why it's not correct. What was incorrect about the word usage? Does that vocabulary word not mean what that sentence implies it means? And how would you go about fixing that sentence? Word maps, which are on page 481, is a form of graphic organizer to help more visualize word relations to each other. So you want to teach and model this. Word maps help students understand a new word and its relation to previously learned words and their prior knowledge. A word is placed in the center of the map, and its related words are connected. So you may do the word awesome. That goes in the middle of the map. And then you'd come up with a synonym, an antonym, an example, and a non-example of the word awesome. For guided practice, provide students with a word. It can be any word. For example, the word awesome, like I just said. Have students think of instances that they have used the word awesome. For example, when discussing a rainbow, they may say, oh, I saw an awesome rainbow the other day. Have them add rainbow as the example. And you could say, okay, well, what's a synonym for awesome? Amazing. That would go in the synonym portion, and so on, so on. For independent practice, students will create a word map using vocabulary words from the selected text you're reading. They will identify the synonyms, antonyms, examples, and non-examples relating to their chosen word. For an assessment with a word map, it would look something like this. This came directly from the book. Students will be assessed on their word maps, and if they're correctly identified 4 things relating to the word, they'll be required to identify synonym, antonym, example, and non-example of their chosen word. So here we see awesome in the middle and the synonym amazing. The antonym for that, or the opposite of that, would be dull. A good example of awesome would be a colorful rainbow, while a non-example would be a great day. That's not very awesome. And this is the rubric that would go along with that assessment. The keyword method is the last method covered. The keyword method is a method involving linking keywords with target words, and this method is statistically proven to work really well with students with learning difficulties. So when you'd use this, you just want to directly explain to students what you're doing. The keyword method is a method of remembering vocabulary words by linking your target words with keywords. So when you teach and model this in class, you would take your target word. Your target word may be river. A keyword for the target word is identified, something relating to rivers, like freshwater. Link the keyword with the meaning of the target word. Okay, you have rivers. You maybe bring up to students, okay, what do rivers always look like? They always have very clean, very fresh-looking water. You then want to use that to recall the meaning of your target word. Rivers look fresh. Rivers have fresh water. Freshwater rivers. That's how you'd want to use the keyword method. It's kind of more of a memorization method, but it's been proven really effective with students over time. And that was chapter 11.